In April 1986, police officers raided the home of Eric Reed Boucher, better known as Jello Biafra, lead singer of the San Francisco punk band The Dead Kennedys, in response to complaints by the Parents Music Resource Center, the PMRC. In June 1986, LA Deputy City Attorney Michael Garino, working under City Attorney James Hahn, brought Biafra to trial in Los Angeles for distributing harmful material to minors in the Dead Kennedys album Frankenchrist. However, the dispute was about neither the music nor the lyrics from the album, but rather the print of H.R. Giger poster Landscape XX, Penis Landscape, included with the album. Biafra believes the trial was politically motivated. It was often reported that the PMRC took Biafra to court as a cost-effective way of sending a message out to other musicians with content considered offensive in their music. Music author Rebe Garofalo argued that Biafra and Alternative Tentacles may have been targeted because the label was a small, self-managed, and self-supported company that could ill afford a protracted legal battle. Facing the possible sentence of a year in jail and a $2,000 fine, Biafra, Dirk Dirksen, and Suzanne Stefanak founded the No More Censorship Defense Fund, a benefit featuring several punk rock bands, to help pay for his legal fees, which neither he nor his record label could afford. The jury deadlocked 5-7 in favor of acquittal, prompting a mistrial. Despite a motion to retry the case, the judge ordered all charges dropped. The Dead Kennedys disbanded during the trial in December 1986 due to the mounting legal costs. In the wake of their disbandment, Biafra made a career of his spoken word performances. On June 10, 1991, Biafra released his third spoken word album, I Blow Minds for a Living. This featured 3 talks on censorship called Let Us Pray, Better Living Through New World Orders, and Fear of a Free Planet. Those talks outlined the politics and methods of the moral guardians of their day. That was 1991. What has changed in 2017? What can the cultural libertarians and skeptic community of our own time learn from the struggles of Biafra and others like him back in the days of the PMRC and the early religious right that can be used today against the social justice warriors and the regressive left? This video contains those 3 lectures. Enjoy.
So now we've seen what happens when people start with censoring unpopular rock and roll songs and photographers and books, and it mushrooms into all of us being denied our access to information itself. When disillusioned, frightened people get used to the idea that being lied to and terrorized by their own government is okay. We're being told this is a war where nobody dies. 100,000 Arabs maybe, but they're not people. And for color commentators in the sportscast, we have magically rehabilitated Contragate criminals to show us the way to honesty and patriotic justice. Millions of people protesting this war all over the world, but you open up a paper, especially around here, turn on the TV, and they hardly happened at all. They don't even tell you that there were huge riots in places like Cairo, Morocco, Syria, where thousands were shot by their dictators, and it wasn't Saddam Hussein they were protesting, it was their dictators sucking up to Bush. And all those times, Saddam Hussein, our latest Willie Horton, offered to withdraw from Kuwait, which he did repeatedly. Whoop, they didn't happen either. And Ollie North is a patriot. Our missiles are now called patriots. storming Norman Schwarzkopf is a sex symbol and opposing the war is unpatriotic treason. Now we know what we are up against. A coup has happened right here at home. Our Constitution and our democracy has slowly but surely been overthrown, and the head of the secret police is now president. Meet the New World Order, another concept borrowed from the Nazis. If Saddam Hussein is the new Hitler, then what is George Bush? How about the 20th century Benedict Arnold, betraying the American people and what America's supposed to stand for gangsters and corporations on a global basis? And is anybody here who hasn't figured out yet that Bush's own people planted all those stories about what a wimp he is to keep people from catching on to what he really is? Hitler had great ratings in the polls for a while too, but just because people supported him doesn't mean he was right. And even the most Bush-happy, flag-suckling jackass knows deep down inside that something is wrong. America is over, and everyone knows it. The New World Order has a dying empire odor, and changing the channel ain't gonna make this go away. Third world malnutrition, pollution, and AIDS getting worse and worse. Our banking system on the verge of collapse, and we're more in debt than any other country in the world. Our cities and roads are falling apart, and the schools all suck because parents are too chintzy to pay for them. And yet Tipper Gore and James Baker's wife, Susan, still have the gall to blame gang violence and teen suicide on rock music. We are now being conquered and colonized from within, beaten down, terrorized, transformed into a Brazilian-style third world plantation, where a few super rich old money families have almost all the money, and there's a housebroken middle class kept sedated with a few toys, and massive growing swarms of poor people who know they ain't never gonna have a chance, kept in their kennels at gunpoint by a heavy-duty run-amok police state. Kind of like the ones our patriotic president helped set up in places like Brazil, Argentina, Chile, the Philippines, Guatemala, El Salvador, you name it, back when he was director of the CIA. Saw a guy over the weekend speak over in Berkeley named Noam Chomsky, who's damn lucky he's white, or he would have been dead a long time ago. He had this to say, quote, "It's no big secret that what's called infrastructure is declining. The cities are a wreck, educational systems are collapsing, health care is gone. That's very serious. In fact, corporations are now worried about it. The reason they're worried is that all the Labor Department and other projections are that about 50% of the jobs in the next decade have to be filled by blacks and Hispanics. That is, by people who are consigned to concentration camps called cities, where they don't get educated, don't learn how to read and write, and only learn how to shoot each other and shoot drugs. Gee, I wonder who planned that. It's widely expected that there's going to be a serious shortage of skilled labor in the United States. Though when there's a shortage, that means the price goes up. When the cost of skilled labor goes up, transnational corporations are going to go somewhere where it's cheaper, meaning everything from research to typing will be sought out somewhere else where there is ample skilled labor. It might even be the third world, where educational systems are not so, as he puts it, unimpressive, especially the new third world that they're hoping to open up in Eastern Europe. The question is, what happens to the United States? There's always the job of mercenary. Somebody has to keep the third world under control, and the United States is the only one with the force to do it. Thanks to the Soviet economy finally imploding, there is no deterrent against us anymore. We may not have the economic base, therefore others are going to have to pay the United States for this. Germany and Japan aren't all that eager to pay for it, but petrodollars are still there. This is George Bush's visionary way of leading us into the future and solving our problems at home. No peace dividend economy, no cleanup of the environment or urban renewal, no future for children, just a genocide for hire, new world order. Who is the next Saddam Hussein? Gaddafi? Hafez Assad? Peru? Colombia? Mexico? Us? Now Bush says, quote, the kind of moral force and national will that massacred 100 or 1,000 or more Iraqi men, women, and children, many of whom in the photos look like they've been shot in the back, will be turned and focused on his, quote, war on crime. And the drug war concentration camps are already going up. And last fall, Congress almost passed a law saying they could hold any one of us in jail for up to a year just on suspicion of using drugs. And Bush also wants a law where workers who go on strike can be permanently fired. And he's also trying to sneak it through so radioactive waste can be dumped anywhere, including town and city sewers. And the media does their parts by just hinting that fighting back and fixing things, well, it just looks so hard, don't even try. So now we have a mass case of people so afraid of being hit with the truth they go out of their way to avoid finding out what it is. This brings to mind the Nuremberg trials, where defendants justified their war crimes saying they were just going along, following orders. They didn't ask questions because they were afraid and didn't want to know what the answers were. But we haven't allowed things to get quite that far yet. And that is why we're fed so many lies by the straight corporate press. Have you ever seen so much obviously fabricated news? Have you ever seen them go so far out of their way to deny what we see with our own eyes? Does anyone sense some frantic desperation here? We should congratulate ourselves for this. This is very much in our favor. This shows how scared their bosses are of us. They know better than anybody that 90% of the people don't support George Bush. They know better than anybody about our power and our numbers. They just wish we were as dumb as American schools are designed to make us. That's why it's supposed to look like they got this over quick. No mess, not a speck of cereal. That's why they launched another war going on right now against our alternative and underground culture. Boy, do they go out of their way to trash the conscious side of the 60s. You were grooving on rock in the mud at Woodstock instead of making money and babies. Shame. Trying to make everyone who stood up and rebelled against the Vietnam War and worked for civil rights and the environment to look bad and unpatriotic, as if to say, don't ever try anything like that again, because it worked a little too well. From now on, this is what goes. No one is homeless. Racism is hip, pollution is progress, and the cops are our friends. And don't you dare spread any information hostile to the financial interests of the new world order. But this ain't El Salvador yet, thankfully. And the main thing keeping that from happening is us. There are times when our government gets so frightened it does kill, like the Black Panthers, the American Indian movement, and now they have a new target, environmentalists. Most of you know about Judy Berry and Daryl Cherney getting blown up in an assassination attempt in a car. And I saw Judy Berry speak over at a church of all places, the Noe Valley Ministry, and she said the only reason she's probably still alive after the first attempt didn't work is so many people making so much noise about what went down. She said that Greenpeace gave them money to hire a private detective, and they traced the person in charge of trying to wipe out Earth First and the radical environmental movement as being Richard Held, the same FBI guy who was there when they killed Fred Hampton and Mark Clark of the Black Panthers in Chicago, the same guy in charge when they killed dozens, if not hundreds, of American Indian movement members in South Dakota. Here they are again with the Nixon heads in charge. As she put it, the only reason we don't have death squads in this country is they don't think they need them yet. So, pain in the ass as it may be, we who want to stop this new world order may wind up having to study how it was done in places like Czechoslovakia, spreading information person to person, keeping alive the evidence of what's really going on. Don't hate the media, become the media. There's still a lot of it left, so why not use it? They already know who we are, so why not get louder and louder and louder? Now more than ever, let's hope it ain't our last chance. The 90s may not be pleasant, but they sure as hell ain't gonna be boring. And hang on to your dignity by having a little bit of fun each day, monkey wrenching the new world order. Pranks. Now more than ever. In the office, at the savings and loan. A woman from the SF Weekly was interviewing me a few days ago saying, "Who are your heroes?" And I couldn't think of a good answer to that. I'm kind of cynical about these things. Then it dawned on me, no wonder I can't think of who my heroes are. They're not stars with famous faces. I don't even know their names. My heroes are people who monkey wrench the New World Order and just go and do it and don't brag about it. Don't make up an organization name, thus ensuring they'll get caught. Like, how about those general strike flyers that went up on January 15th? Not only announcing a general strike, but claiming it was endorsed by people like Herb Cain and Joe Montana. Which then meant the networks and the papers had to mention the term general strike on the air as they called up and annoyed people like Joe Montana, wondering why they would be endorsing a general strike. You know, don't let the conservatives and the farty old left tell you that resistance isn't any fun. Resistance is great fun. Like the people in Fort Worth, Texas, who put up flyers saying, "We will kill our pets to protest the war at the fountain here on such and such a date." The riot police show up. All the networks showed up. All these people show up. Of course, the animal rights activists are there in force. And the people who did it showed up incognito and didn't reveal who they were. So all these people who'd taken all this time off their jobs just stood around waiting for it to happen, and it never did. Or maybe my favorite of all is still the day back in Dead Kennedys, we were trying to get together for practice, and Ray couldn't make it over the bay because the bridge was jammed. Turned out traffic was jammed all the way into Oakland, up over into Contra Costa County. Of course, on the other side it was jammed too. Why? I don't know whether this was intentional or not, but a barrel of white powder fell off a truck and cracked open on the Bay Bridge. It was unmarked. They feared the worst, called out the toxic waste squad to spend all day, a work day, mopping it up. Hundreds of thousands of people didn't make it to work that day, costing companies who knows how much so-called valuable time. They finally announced that night they took the chemical and analyzed it, and it was flour. I thought that was pretty amusing myself. It's time to talk about censorship. So, 2 Live Crew got off in Florida. No cheers. And in spite of some unfortunate outcomes in our so-called elections, 2 of the most horrible people, Bob Martinez in Florida, who arranged the 2 Live Crew bust, although he now may get Bennett's job, and Clayton Williams in Texas, did not get to become governor after all. And a jury in Cincinnati agreed that prosecuting art museums for political reasons sucks. But how much is this really going to solve? You think we turned the corner? Or is that corner actually you stand it on end and it's the tip of the iceberg? To me, people like the rabid fundamentalists who arranged the 2 Live Crew bust, or the sheriff down there, or Jesse Helms, or any of them, or William Dannemeyer, you like them, you'll love people like George Bush, a former CIA director with a long history of involvement of political dirty tricks, covert actions, death squads, assassinations, and if you believe the allegations in the Christic Institute lawsuits, and I think this is turned up in Warren Hinkle's column in The Examiner, among other places, a drug gangster as well. In a way, Al Capone has become president of the United States. And normally we might look to a so-called opposition, the supposed progressives, the Democrats, right? Well, the Democratic-controlled Senate last August approved on a voice vote Senate Bill 2834, the Intelligence Authorization Act for 1991. In the House, the number of the House bill is 5422. It was passed as well. In this bill, it gives ex-CIA director George Al Capone Bush power to do any covert operation he wants anywhere in the world and not tell anyone he's done it. He can use the CIA and the Army and the National Guard for covert operations inside this country, legally, for the first time. He can use private corporations to get the money. He can also divert money from any other government agency he wants to fund it. He can use any government agency he wants for this. He could take money from AIDS research, he could use NASA for covert operations, whatever, and not have to tell anybody about it. Essentially, with a stroke of a pen, every Contragate and Watergate crime has now been made legal. Pete Wilson sponsored the bill, Alan Cranston voted for it. And on top of that, we have House Resolution 4079. Number in this bill in the Senate is 2245, National Drug and Crime Emergency Act. This is the bill that authorizes money being spent to convert old Army bases in hot desert areas or hot temperate southern climates into concentration camps, labor camps, gulags, manzanars, for not only convicted drug users, but suspected drug users, which could mean practically anybody in this room listening to this. Suspected drug users. And it says in the House bill, it is forbidden to have air conditioners in these buildings, in these concentration camps, and prisoners should be forced to do hard labor for free on behalf of corporations that help run the jails. People like William Bennett and Bush and Attorney General Thornburg have proudly proclaimed that the American prison population is going to double in the next 10 years. It already doubled in the last 10 years, and we have more people in prison per capita than any other country in the world, and they say they're going to double that. And keep in mind, covert operations doesn't just mean planting a bug in the lampshade in someone's bedroom. It means murders, killings, assassinations of people whose political views or activities people like George Bush doesn't happen to like. And some of this is already going on. I'd like to ask old Abby Hoffman what he had to say on that subject right about now. Basically, what we've seen is a revival of what was called in Nixon and J. Edgar Hoover's days COINTELPRO, which meant things like surrounding the Black Panthers in Chicago's apartment building and machining gunning them to death through the walls, claiming self-defense. And the guy over there mentioned Geronimo Pratt, a leader of the Panthers in Los Angeles, who has been locked, unless he's out of solitary now, in solitary for years and years and years for saying that he didn't commit the murder that he claims people set him up on. He's not even allowed to talk about it. There's also a guy who tried to call a press conference right before the 1988 election saying he was Dan Quayle's old dope dealer. Yes, imagine smoking pot with Quayle. I'll say this, I sure wish he was president right now instead of Bush. I'd much rather have a dumb Nazi in charge than a smart Nazi who's bent on starting World War III just to enhance his oil accounts. Anyway, this guy, maybe he was a nut. Maybe he was just talking off the top of his head. But if he was, why was he then thrown in solitary until after the election and has been denied parole ever since? And keep in mind that up in Humboldt County, GIs are sent for a war operation against the American people, putting guns to people's heads in their cabins. Or Earth First, a car carrying Daryl Cherney and Judy Berry, two of their main activists in Oakland, blows up. And I suspect they were probably supposed to blow up too, but they survived. And Daryl is now out of the hospital and living in fear of his life, occasionally performing. Last I heard, Judy Berry was still in the hospital, and only last August it was determined she might be able to walk again.
She's performing.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, I stand corrected. Good. Anyway, and some rumors up in Mendocino County from the Earth First people were that they found plainclothes Mendocino County sheriff deputies standing in the crowd when the bomb went off. Instead of the usual half an hour to respond, the Oakland police were there in 5 minutes. They announced they were going to charge Judy and Daryl with blowing themselves up, which they still haven't done, but you wonder who did that. Cherney seems to think it was the timber companies, since they were also IWW members trying to organize non-union workers in lumber mills. But you also wonder whether somebody like Bush might have had a hand in this. Somebody who has no trouble with rubbing people out on any kind of a scale. Another thing that's not being reported right now, you'll notice how little a lot of this is being reported, is Bush has lied about the body count in Panama. Big time. He claimed, no problem, 24 Americans dead, 200 Panamanians gone, big deal. Well, that's still pretty outrageous to me. But the real total, according to Warren Hinkle or The Nation or SF Weekly or some of the others, and there's even been a 60 Minutes thing on this now where they've been unearthing Auschwitz-style mass graves of Panamanians that were dug and bulldozed by American soldiers. Real body count, 240 Americans killed, 2,000 to 5,000 Panamanians killed, many of whom died when the stealth bomber, which can't shoot straight, blew up wealthy neighborhoods. This kind of information, I would think, would be relevant right as Bush is trying to get people to follow him into a war. How is he going to lie about the body count there? You'll remember they did it first in Vietnam as well. And down in San Luis Obispo, there's now a paramilitary training center, Camp San Luis Obispo. Where is the Chronicle article I saw it in proudly proclaimed, finally, Small-town police officers, big city cops, National Guards, and the Army are learning to work together to fight drugs. In other words, like a junta, they are turning the Army and the police into one big force with their guns turned on us. The maneuver they were rehearsing when the Chronicle reporter was there was, oh, this is a courageous way to fight drugs, ambushing a vehicle on a lonely road. What does this sound like to you? To me, this sounds like the war on drugs is a war on us. Basically, the way to get people hysterical enough that they will actually accept a banana republic type police state and junta that Bush and his thugs love so well. It seems like they're just testing us right now to see how much we'll tolerate before we get mad. Does anybody care if Earth First gets blown up? Does anybody care if the Army's running amok in our own country? Does anybody care about San Luis Obispo or William Bennett's proposals to randomly stop and search cars in people's houses? That's part of zero tolerance. You know, zero tolerance, which they passed right before the election in 1988, saying they find a couple joints in your car or on your boat in Florida. They can confiscate all your property and sell it before you're even brought to trial. So if you're found innocent, you've already lost everything. They can apply it to political targets and, suspected drug users like they want to put in the camps, all they want. There was also something that came out at the Countergate hearings from our good friend Ollie North, where he revealed he'd drawn up a plan for martial law, saying in event of a national emergency, which he defined as anti-war protests against an invasion of Nicaragua, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the same people who are supposed to be in charge of earthquake and hurricane relief, well, why did they do such a bad job? Reagan transformed them into a martial law agency. They now have an underground bunker headquarters in Virginia and files upon files of probably everybody in this room. And what North wanted to do was round up, he said 100,000 or so people, lock them in camps, and to help do the job, he wanted to deputize the Posse Comitatus. Anybody not know who the Posse Comitatus is? Do you know who the Aryan Nations are? Neo-Nazi paramilitary group. The Posse Comitatus are a sister, I better say brother, organization that operates in the South around southern Missouri. And right when this was blurted out, then a Democrat hero from the Watergate Committee, chairman of the Countergate Committee, Senator Daniel Inouye, cut off testimony and changed the subject. We have no idea if this same plan is being readied against protesters against a war in Kuwait and Iraq or not. The FBI is already getting into the act as well. Some of you around here may know about Jock Sturgis, a renowned photographer. His style is kind of high fashion, a little bit slicker and dreamier than Richard Avedon, but kind of the same kind of style photos, often of people who are nude, sometimes in nudist camps, sometimes children taken on commission by their parents. These have been shown in galleries all over the world. Well, San Francisco FBI pulled up to Jock Sturgis's place with a moving van, knocked in the door, walked off with everything he owned. Everything he owned. They had no warrant, but they took all his photos, all his negatives, his originals, all of this special kind of paper he used to process his prints so they'd give it that specific Jock Sturgis look. They took that, took his computer. They even had it on the list to take his clothes and his cat. But they decided to leave that behind. And to this day, Jock Sturgis has not been charged with a crime. But they just came and took his life, and in the fine tradition of slowly implementing martial law at such a turtle's pace that most people won't get alarmed by it, since Americans wouldn't tolerate tanks in the streets, not yet anyway. No, just saying, well, we got your stuff. What are you going to do about it? And what they're trying to bust him under is something that was attached to that zero tolerance bill by Jesse Helms called the Child Protection and Obscenity Enforcement Act, which was a little gift to us from the Ed Meese Pornography Commission. where under this act, it's just like zero tolerance, same principle. Say they bust a Madonna record in Arkansas and get a conviction in some backwoods Bible Belt jury. Bush and his friends at the federal level, the federales, can then go in and seize Warner Brothers. You know, they can confiscate anything they suspect of being acquired through profits made by selling pornography. Meaning they could even take secretaries' typewriters, security guards' private cars, the works. They can just go and do it. And to some small degree, they already have been. Of course, there was the 2 Live Crew bust, which even though they themselves got off, the record store owner was convicted in a separate trial in the same place, and the sheriff of Broward County, Florida, announced he's going to bust anybody caught listening to 2 Live Crew in their own car. In North Carolina, people have already been arrested for playing 2 Live Crew in their own home. And you'll notice about a year and a half ago, simultaneously, for some strange reason, in state legislatures all over the country, all these similarly worded bills and laws popped up, calling for mandatory labeling on records, saying you had to check off categories like homosexuality, morbid violence. What about Sylvester Stallone or the man who shot Liberty Valance? And in Florida, you couldn't mention nudity, or the record was either X-rated or banned. In Louisiana, you couldn't even mention adultery. And to add fuel to the fire, the racial card was played. Parents Music Resource Center, of course, had been planning the hysteria campaign through their religious right lieutenants that heavy metal music is corrupting our youth, making them disagree with their parents. Gee, why would they do that in this day and age? You know, if your parent is a corrupt Wall Street person and you ask them why they're such an asshole, well, must be the music's fault. But it really caught fire when they were finally able to play the racial card. Hip-hop music came in. And just like when they got rock and roll canned in the late 50s and lynched Alan Freed for daring to play Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and many people who have played in this room on pop radio, they were doing it again. There was even one example of how the racism card was used is the Rap Rage cover story that ran in Newspeak magazine with Tone Loc on the front. We have some great quotes here. This is their description of Public Enemy. As scary as sudden footsteps in the dark. What else have we got here? Attitude is primarily a working class and underclass phenomenon. A response to the diminishing expectations of the millions of American youths who forgot to go to business school in the 1980s. This was not some grumpy George Will column, although he trumpeted in later, and Tipper Gore and Susan Baker around the same time got to run a My Turn column in Newspeak, blaming Run DMC and Tone Loc for the Wilding incident in Central Park in New York because one suspect was singing one of their songs on the way to jail. It all fit in. It was all a little bit too well choreographed, if you ask me. And then, lo and behold, the major labels, being the chicken shit money-grubbing scum fucks that they are, knuckled under and caved in lock, stock, and barrel to the Parents Music Resource Center and agreed to put those explicit lyrics parental advisory stickers on records. Mysteriously, all these bills went away from the state legislatures almost overnight. It was a power play run by the Parents Music Resource Center in cahoots with their friends on the religious right. Tipper Gore has claimed to my face on Oprah Winfrey that they have no connection with the religious right. But some of their lieutenants include people like the Eagle Forum. You know who the Eagle Forum is? You know who Phyllis Schlafly is? One of the most powerful behind-the-scenes ultra-right-wing people, the one who's mainly responsible for getting condom machines taken out of college dorms, trying to get all sex education taken out of public schools, except maybe teaching women that having an abortion or premarital sex will make them all diseased later on. The Eagle Forum also wants driver ed taken out of public schools, mention of the UN taken out of public schools because talking about the United Nations is unpatriotic. And basically, Phyllis Schlafly got started in the mid-1970s. When I was in high school, I read a report in the Colorado Daily about her then. She was funded by insurance companies to try and stop the Equal Rights Amendment for women because insurance companies didn't want to have to pay out the same amount of premiums to women and damage claims to women as they did to men. So, Women Against Women's Rights was born. And there was no stopping Phyllis Schlafly and the Eagle Forum. Oh, and according to her own biography, guess how she made money to put herself through college? Test firing submachine guns. And yet, Phyllis Schlafly and her crew travel the country telling other women their places in the home. Let's look at the bills now again. The bill in the state of Missouri was originally cooked up by a so-called concerned parent group, if that sounds familiar, called Missouri Project Rock, who had earlier been calling for a ban on all rock concerts statewide for people under 17, which would pretty much KO the scene in places like Kansas City and St. Louis. Later, then, they helped put together the bill, which was then introduced by Gene Dixon, a nationally prominent censor from Springfield, Missouri, the same town that wouldn't allow high school dancing until they had to under a court order last year. But Missouri Project Rock claimed, oh, we're just concerned parents. We want truth in packaging, truth in labeling, meaning if Tipper Gore says it's bad, it must be bad. And what they didn't tell you was their real background. Shirley Marvin, one of the co-founders of Missouri Project Rock, was a state lobbyist in Missouri for Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum, and claimed that she had been inspired to start Missouri Project Rock by seeing Tipper Gore speak and meeting her at an Eagle Forum convention. And yet Tipper Gore denied to my face on Oprah Winfrey, right after I caught her lying about something else, that the PMRC and the Eagle Forum have any connections. And the other co-founder of Missouri Project Rock turned out to be Reverend Shane Westholter, who, according to an article in the Village Voice in New York, sent their reporter either a book or a tape, I can't remember which, on why the Holocaust never happened and Hollywood is promoting too much race mixing. Remember the religious right demonstrations against the Last Temptation of Christ, saying that there were too many Jews in Hollywood? Well, some of those same people trace back to folks like Reverend Donald Wildman in Tupelo, Mississippi, who has become so powerful behind the scenes, he got a Madonna Pepsi commercial that Pepsi had put $10 million into, nuked with a phone call. They never ran it because Wildman threatened Pepsi. Wildman the Wild Man. And another group like this is Focus on the Family, who's very active in trying to put God back in the schools, get boycotts going against people who sponsor shows they don't happen to like. And so with some of these people, the ones they don't like are things like The Simpsons or something like that. Wildman even got him to nuke Mighty Mouse. He sent out a letter to his mailing list. I was on his list for a while. It's a great way to eavesdrop on these people. Radical publications are good, but not as good as just reading their stuff. It's a good yuck, plus you find out where they're really at. Wildman's letter began, "Dear friends, CBS has declared war on our children." All because Mighty Mouse sniffed a bouquet of flowers and it went up his nose. Therefore, he was promoting cocaine abuse on TV. And as a result of this, when they reran that episode, that scene was cut. Next season, Mighty Mouse just said no to flowers. Season after that, Mighty Mouse was off the air. Incidentally, guess who is on the board of Focus on the Family? Tipper Gore's co-founder at the PMRC, Susan Baker, wife of Secretary of State James Baker. She and James Baker are both hardcore, holy roller fundamentalist Christian supremacists. I mean, I'm not down on people who are Christians or believe in God, but people who take their own narrow interpretation of the Bible and want to force it on everybody else by law or even gunpoint are as low as white supremacists or male supremacists or any of the others. They are Christian supremacists. Susan Baker has told the New York Times, quote, "I am God's instrument," unquote. And her purpose in life is to, quote, unquote, live out the gospel. And makes me feel a little queasy, as I said before, that James Baker, a fundamentalist holy roller who may even believe in the imminent coming of Armageddon and we are the last generation, therefore we must bring it on, which Reagan and James Watt openly espoused to as well, he's one of the people in charge of World War III in the Middle East. And if we last through that, James Baker is Bush's desired and designated heir for the presidency, which would be worse than if Pat Robertson got in the White House. As far as I'm concerned, this is how close the paramilitary right, the intelligence community, if I can use the term intelligence loosely, the Pentagon goons on one hand and the fundamentalist goons on the other, working both together and to some degree in competition with each other to try and turn America into a fundamentalist police state. Why is this not being reported? Why are people like the Examiner and Newspeak and Time and USA Today and the Evening News not talking about Bush lying about the body count, about the Army in Humboldt County, about Camp San Luis Obispo, or the religious Nazis who are pulling all too many strings? Well, have any of you seen a book called The Media Monopoly by Ben Bigdickian? It first came out in 1981, and it was horrifying enough in the first edition. He documented how 80% of all our media, we're talking movies, TV news, newspapers, books, records, even school textbooks, were all in the hands of only 40 large corporations, all run by conservative Republicans or those types. Now, as revised edition is out, we're down to 20 large corporations, with predictions it's going to be down to as few as 6 by 1995. 6 ultra-right-wing money grubbers giving us so-called news like the USA Today school of news, you know, happy news for happy people with happy problems, the American Pravda. You know, when people don't know what hurts them or who's doing it, they don't care. So why not use the TV news or the newspapers to sell cigarettes and cookies and maybe get a nice Donna Rice-type scandal, somebody like that, then sign her up to the company-owned book company to write the tell-all book, then the company-owned studio will make the movie, and all the company-owned cookie and beer products will be prominently featured in the movie. Company-owned artists will get their songs in the movie, which will then come out on a soundtrack on the company-owned record company. And the reviewers in the company-owned newspapers and magazines will rave about how great the movie is. I mean, this is not far from what is already going on. You know, basically, we will be basing our voting decisions, our political decisions, our lifestyle decisions, our decisions on whether to lock our kids in mental homes for listening to the wrong music or sending people off to war. We're going to wind up with this for our information. So, with that going on, who is left to tell us what's really going on? There are some other good news outlets. Some magazines I like include, nationally, there's The Progressive, The Nation, Multinational Monitor out of Washington, D.C., Utne Reader's a good one. In spite of how yuppie it's looking these days, Mother Jones still has some good information in it. A Covert Action Information Bulletin in Washington, D.C., Zenger, Z, a lot of good radical bookstores here you can find them at. Also, Pacifica News Service, which KPFA broadcasts. No accident that their main station, KPFK in Los Angeles, is among the most harassed by Reagan and Bush's FCC. It is a culture war at this point, trying to shut off alternative culture like hip-hop, Robert Mapplethorpe, Jock Sturgis, Dead Kennedys, Two Live Crew, what have you, is designed as a way to keep people more addicted to the kind of media Ben Bigdickian is warning us about in his book, so that they're more than happy to go off to war and die for oil in Saudi Arabia. And if there is a mass uprising, where will these people go if there are no artists to articulate their feelings? Artists are the other people who are out there telling it like it is at this point. And consequently, they're being hit the hardest. So there is a culture war going on. Patrick Buchanan, of all people, even came right out and said it in a column he ran in the Washington Times last June, where he said in so many words, this isn't his exact words, but it's close to it, that now that the Reagan Revolution is complete politically in the 1980s, we must cement it in place in the 1990s with a cultural revolution. His idea of a cultural revolution is to wipe out what he called smutty and dirty and lewd art, using almost the exact same words to describe it that Hitler used in the 20s and early 30s, saying we had to crack down on that sort of art because it was weakening the Aryan race. Substitute family values for Aryan race, and you have Bush, Tipper, Buchanan, and those people. Hitler called for a crackdown on people who were openly gay and had them wear pink triangles once he came into power. Kind of like they put parental advisory stickers on people's records now. Same kind of thing. And but believe it or not, in Germany, it's hardly ever documented now, there was a huge counterculture explosion after World War I. People had long hair. They were moving back to nature. They were having nudist camps. They were openly sexual. And of course, one of the first things they want to crack down on to try and muzzle people's minds or ideas, or the feeling that such things as taking into the streets and getting rid of the crooks as possible, is to muzzle them sexually. And both Bush and Hitler made a big stink about desecration of the national flag and what a crime it was supposed to be right when they first came into power, as a way of whipping people into blind, ugly nationalism so they'd follow the Pied Piper off the cliff into a world war and, not matter if people were getting gassed or anything. They came for the Jews and I didn't protest because I wasn't a Jew. They came for the crack dealers and I didn't protest because I was tired of tripping over those icky homeless people asking me for money on the way to the yogurt stand during lunch hour. And so the other ways they're cracking down on artists, besides prosecuting people running museums, going after Jock Sturgis or Robert Mapplethorpe, not even in the 60s, during the height of the Vietnam War protests, did anybody actually want to screw around with the Bill of Rights. But Bush and Rehnquist sure do. Rehnquist has even said it's time to tear down the wall between church and state, as well as ruling that, I think I mentioned this before, that it's okay to force-feed drugs to prisoners. Right around the same time they're letting them out of the gulags in Siberia. Now we get to do it here. Well, let's go back to the PMRC and the religious right for a minute. The culture war is being fought guerrilla style at the community level all around us, even in San Francisco. What they will do is either a PMRC lieutenant in a local town or an Eagle Forum lieutenant or something like that. They work together. PTA is involved in this too. They'll send their local cultural vigilantes to say, if they want to target a record store, they'll go to the owner of the actual shopping mall where a lot of chain record stores are located, which is the bulk of major record companies' business, and say, well, they used to say, see this blacklist that we got from the PMRC? We want these records out of the store, or the store evicted, or we're going to picket every single store in your whole mall until you cry uncle, and cost every business money and humiliate them as smut vendors in our eyes. You know, these are the same people who go behind people's backs and get school boards to ban Halloween because they don't want anybody dressed as a witch or something like that. A lot of times it works if they keep quiet so nobody can reply. That's why they don't picket a record store out front where they might be ridiculed by customers or covered in the press or told they're wrong. They do it quietly. They threaten economic boycotts, and often it works. In the days of the PMRC blacklist, before the stickering, the last one literally was a black list. Almost everybody on there was black. I may have been one of the few white people left on that list. Now, with the record companies themselves doing the dirty work for them, these same lame major record companies who didn't even bother defending these stores when they were getting attacked by the old biddies, they could have sent artists to do autograph sessions or something like that, promoting free speech, but instead they told them not to talk about censorship in their interviews, and only a few people have. So, there are still ways to fight back against these people. Number one, as much as you possibly can, support independent record companies and artists. Also, be ready to go to bat for stores and radio stations who get attacked by the FCC and the PMRC. Don't wait for the negative complainers to decide what you listen to. How about some positive reinforcement? Radio station does something you like? Call them up and tell them. Give the record stores your phone numbers or an address so if they start getting hassled, they can call up everybody on that list or send out a card, and instead of waiting for the vigilantes or the cops to come after them, they can go after the vigilantes and picket them and call out the press and call them on the carpet saying, look, this is what is obscene, is racism, bigotry, and Christian supremacists. The last thing our militaristic banana republic wannabe government wants is people getting together and quit fighting with each other and starting to fight back because they know there's more of us. We're the ones who buy the records, not the fundamentalists. We have the power of the purse. You know, if you go to a chain store, like what happened in Columbus, Ohio, a kid wrote me a letter saying he tried to buy my No More Cocoons spoken word album, a spoken word album that one of his friends had bought a couple months before, and he was told he was too young to buy it. He was carded. He had to be 18 to buy No More Cocoons. And he said, well, why? What's going on here? He asked to speak to the manager, and the manager said, oh, well, he was kind of embarrassed by this point. It was an upper echelon decision made behind closed doors. You know, meaning they probably were meeting with an Eagle Forum or PMRC lieutenant. So then he went through the bins, seeing the other 18 to purchase stickers, and of course there was Two Live Crew, Ice-T, NWA, Public Enemy, and Henry Rollins, SNFU, Big Black, Butthole Surfers. And I looked between all these names, and it turned out every single record I've ever made that has my name on it had an 18 to purchase sticker on it, whether or not I uttered any of the 7 words you can't say on television. In other words, it was my name and maybe the ideas or what the records represented that they're trying to get rid of. So what happens if a store does that and kicks out the independent records and whatnot? Well, you ask to speak to the manager. Pull out a big old wad of bills, preferably 20s. See this, Mr. Manager? I was going to spend all of this on a lot of records in your store today, but because you refuse to carry this record that I want because you're kissing ass to Christians and being chicken rather than fight the police for bad laws, well, I'm going to take all this money and go down the block and spend it at the Cool store who stocks independent records instead. If you can, even buy your commercial records at independent stores. I mean, imagine what could happen if some of these people, say, ghetto activists, could start talking to environmental activists since poor people get poisoned the worst. Imagine if all these people began to interlink. The wedge would be even stronger than the CIA and Camp San Luis Obispo and the National Guard. This is what they're afraid of. And this is the power we have that we're so far too lazy to use, but let's hope that we don't wind up seeing our friends come home in body bags to have to use it. I guess I'll wind this up at this point just saying basically, be on guard. If you don't like what you're reading in the paper, get a second opinion, just like you would if you didn't trust your doctor. It's now or never, them or us. Thank you.